Collective power to take climate action. It has a foreword by Christiana Figueres, and it has case studies featuring 5 leading climate change makers from Ashoka's network. And really, it's written for anyone who's trying to take action themselves and to help other people take action around you on climate. We launched the playbook, or Pip launched the playbook in London earlier this month, and today is the Oxford launch. So we're thrilled to be doing that. I'm joined by Pip Wheaton and Sue Riddlestone. I'll introduce them briefly, and then we'll get into the conversation. And we will have time for your questions as well. We'll make time for that at the end. So Pip is a Skoll Center visiting fellow. She's a Skoll Scholar alumna from 2016. She's an Ashoka Fellow and the Planet and Climate Lead for Ashoka. She's also the lead researcher and co-author on the report, or the playbook, together with myself and our Skoll Center colleague, Jessica Jacobson. So in addition to Pip's work with Ashoka, Pip founded a youth development organization in South Africa. It's called Enke, Make Your Mark. And she's also worked with the Bertha Centre for Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the University of Cape Town, with the Australian government's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trading, and also with the Wellington City Council. So welcome, Pip.
Thank you.
And Sue Riddlestone OBE is also an Ashoka Fellow and the leader of Bioregional. Bioregional is an entrepreneurial charity that Sue co-founded in 1994. And the purpose is really to find ways to live well within the natural limits of our planet and reduce our impact on the natural world. Over 30 years, Bioregional has developed a number of practical solutions for sustainable living, including the world-famous BedZed, which I'm now really excited to visit, an eco-village in London, which is where Sue lived. And I look forward to learning more about that. Okay, so I want to start, though, with you, Pip, and ask you to tell us a little bit about the playbook. So you led the research. You focused on, in the research, talking to and understanding and working with Ashoka Fellows who were themselves climate change makers and who were working to activate others. And so really tell us, who is this playbook for and what is it trying to do?
Great, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. So the idea for the playbook came about when I was working in local government. So I was working in Wellington City Council in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I was super excited to be working in the system after many, many years of working outside the system. And I was delighted to find that I was having these conversations with colleagues all over the organization and outside of the organization who clearly really cared about climate change. You know, I went in thinking that I was going to have to convince people that this was something that they needed to care about, and found out that that work had sort of already been done. But the thing that I was then sort of up against was that so many of them then weren't taking action in their roles in council. And, you know, given that cities play such a massive role in our climate response, I was kind of like, hang on, how is this not happening? If you care, why are you not using your position to take action? And, you know, it was all sorts of reasons. It was maybe they hadn't realized that their work was one of the biggest levers that they could be using to take action. It might have been that they didn't feel like they had a mandate, or maybe just, you know, it was the thing that was at the bottom of a really long to-do list. And so I kind of became fascinated by this question of how do we activate others to recognize the places that they can have the biggest impact and then support them to do that. And then I realized that in parallel to working at Wellington City Council, I was also working at Ashoka. And I realized that I had this veritable library of changemakers who were basically doing just that, who were mobilizing others to take action. And so I, in partnership with Marya and Jessica here at the Skoll Centre, I went on a sort of a quest to interview as many fellows around the world in really diverse contexts, with the idea that if we could surface strategies that showed up again and again in these really diverse contexts, then maybe they could be useful in all sorts of places. And so we talked to fellows who were doing things from working with small fishing communities in Africa and Asia, working with smallholder farmers in Indonesia, working with Fortune 500 companies to transform their supply chains, and everything in between. And we were delighted to see that we did find these common strategies showing up again and again. And so we wrote the playbook. And the strategies are what you've got on the little piece of paper there. But so we found 3 strategies. The first one was making it personal. The second was gathering support. And the third one was creating enabling conditions. And so to give a bit of a sense of what each of those looked like. And in the playbook, we chose 3 tactics for each of those to exemplify how they can be brought to life. But starting with making it personal, you know, there are people who already care, but that so often we hear about climate change in ways that makes it very abstract, very technical. And so making it personal was about really hooking this big, massive challenge onto things that people already care about, and making it really specific to their context, to the place that they live, to the role that they are in at work, and then helping them to build the internal motivation to take action. The second one, gathering support. Making change happen is really hard, particularly when you're pushing against the status quo. And doing it alone is even harder. So the second strategy was all about how do you bring support, as in other people, around this person who's wanting to create change. And so whether that's one-on-one support, so what we call walking alongside someone, or bringing together a community of peers that meant that when they faced setbacks, they had more resilience to continue. And then the third strategy, creating enabling conditions, was the broadest of the 3 strategies, because that was about the context that somebody was operating in. And so it was about removing barriers a lot of the time, and also sometimes about creating stuff that was new. Because climate change is so embedded in all of the systems that we operate in, sometimes all of the internal motivation and all of the relational support just isn't enough. And you actually need to do something to the context that people are operating in. And so all of this is in the playbook, but the thing that we really wanted to do was we wanted to make it relevant for practitioners, for people who are out there and doing this in the world. So whether they were sustainability managers in big companies, or people like I was working in local government trying to work on the city's climate response, we wanted to make sure that this was a tool for them to figure out what to do next.
Great, thank you. And I'll just offer one reflection. Pip obviously did really the heavy lifting and the research, which also I think is one of the most exciting parts of doing this work, and really got to talk to everyone. And I came on and we started talking about sort of, you know, how can we position this in a way that makes it accessible? And I am someone who studies organizations and leadership. And one thing that, you know, was both reassuring and initially for me concerning, but then I came to see it in a different light, was these strategies and practices resonate so much with foundational work about how do you mobilize people to take action in organizations and how do you create change. And if we were trying to publish an academic paper, we would think, oh, it's not novel, but that's exactly the point here, right? That this is really resonant with what we know from other spheres of research is important to mobilize people to take action. And I think one of the exciting things has been to sort of bring to life the examples and the people doing this work and be able to share that. And so, Sue, you are one of those people, and we learned a lot from your work. So tell us about your work at Bioregional and how the playbook and the ideas in it resonate with what you're doing.
Well, really glad to be here. And I feel that you must all be change makers working in climate, or you wouldn't be here. And some of you I know are. And I think one of the things I really love about the playbook is like the quote on the front, for a start: the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something we make and we could just as easily make it differently. And that idea of Ashoka, that everyone's a change maker, and that idea of social entrepreneurship that the Skoll Centre and Ashoka champion so much. So first of all, it's when I started out setting up Bioregional 30 years ago, I didn't even know what a social entrepreneur was. I'm not sure if it was a thing then. And that's why, we set up as a charity because we're trying to do good. things. We're in business for good. And so we called ourselves an entrepreneurial charity. So I think something about the playbook and the sort of tribe of being social entrepreneurs and change makers gives you a confidence that, because can be very lonely going out there. Somebody said being a social entrepreneur is a bit like going out in the dark in a forest without a torch, finding ways forward. And so the playbook just helps us to sort of identify or see, systematizes a bit what everyone that you've interviewed does and some common approaches, which gives people power and strength. And so I think do have a look at that and see how you think you can apply it. And in terms of our work at Bioregional, we started out because just really concerned. I was really concerned about the impact of our consumption on the natural world, actually, mainly. But obviously, there's an impact on the poorest people in the world as well. And that we are consuming too much and producing too much CO2 and consuming too many resources. And how can we set things up so we can still have a good life within the natural limits of the planet? And you may have seen the Oxfam report that comes out every climate conference that says that it's the richest 10% of people in the world that are causing 50% of the climate impact. And the richest people is actually only £32,000 a year. So hopefully that's all of you, I hope. So it's just average people in countries that have done quite well financially that are causing this massive impact that's impacting on the rest of the world. So I guess our work is very much, we call it One Planet Living. So we use the ecological footprint, so that's climate plus resources, the land. And if everyone lived like we do in Europe, we'd need 3 planets to support us. So what we need is one planet living. And at first you think, oh, that sounds, everyone's like, oh, yeah. But, that's one of the tactics in the playbook about making it personal and building understanding. So that's why we say, yeah, so there's your 3 planet footprint, but here's how it breaks down. There's our homes and the energy we use in our homes and traveling around and the stuff we buy. And you can go and do your footprint online and work it out and think about it. And, we can achieve one planet living. So we have examples like the eco village that Marya mentioned, Besharov, and others. There's one in Oxford just up the road called Elmsbrook at the Bicester Eco Town. Examples that show both in new build, but also here in Oxford, we've worked with the community and with Chris, who's here somewhere, on applying One Planet Living in a local authority area. And it's the idea of One Planet Living, it's this 3 planets, but it's also 10 principles of things that we use, basically based on what do people need, what do we consume, and then thinking about how do we make a plan to do that sustainably. So from energy, food, transport, think about water, through to health and happiness and our culture and heritage. So we ended up, after doing the BedZ Eco Village, systematizing what we did into a framework called One Planet Living, which people use around the world. I think there's about 1.2 million people now in communities, either new build or existing local areas that are using One Planet Living. So another important part of it is all the stuff we buy. So we've started out creating products, circular products like recycle your paper and buy it back again, or locally produced wood products. And nowadays, having I think a big part of what we've done is show it can be done. And so nowadays, we're very much just helping everybody else. We made our One Planet Living framework available freely for anyone to use with some tools and resources. And we basically help. So we're kind of a consultancy now. We just help everyone who needs some help, and they come to us because we're kind of the originals. So I'm not sure if that properly answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you've touched on some of the specific tactics where,
Yeah.
you know, we use your examples, right? And I think it very much resonates. And I want to dig in a little bit to some of the other pieces of sort of you and your work and how you collaborate with others. But I'm going to turn to Pip first on this and then come back to you. So, you know, like a set of ideas in the playbook, it's very much around sort of how do you lead and collaborate with others, whether that's in organizations, and motivate others, right? Whether it's in organizations or whether it's in local communities or global communities. Tell us a little bit about how the playbook can be helpful there, like not just motivating yourself, but engaging with others in change making.
Yeah, great. So I think the starting point for me is that, you know, we have more solutions than ever before. We have a better understanding of what's at stake than ever before. And as I was saying earlier, like more people care than ever before. And yet we're still not seeing change happen. And part of the issue is that the solutions are moving so fast and our understanding is moving so fast that it's really hard to navigate where to best step in, where to best contribute. And so what we were sort of exploring is, what's the role then of like a navigator or a guide or a transition coach, you know, call it whatever you want, but the role of somebody who can help you figure out or help your organization figure out, sort of in some of the work that you're doing. So how best to actually use all of the resources, all of your skills, expertise, et cetera, to contribute. And essentially there were two things that came out. One is around finding the places where you can have the biggest impact, which is so deeply contextual that it's really hard to figure out. And, you know, everybody is so time poor and we have such a huge amount of information that's out there that wading through it is actually a pretty big piece of work. It varies country by country. It varies industry by industry. It varies person by person. It varies company by company. And so that navigational help is something that makes it feel less overwhelming. So it helps you bring others into the collaboration. The second part is, you know, thinking about another one of the barriers around being kind of feeling really overwhelmed by the scale of the problem, is helping people shift from thinking about their contribution as an individual and as being a contribution to a bigger whole. And doing that with other people is kind of the key to that. And so really the playbook was sort of a set of strategies for helping that person who's in the role of the navigator or the guide or the coach or whatever you want to call it, to then figure out what are the tools that I need to be able to do that.
Okay, great. And so Sue, as you were saying, and Pip has alluded to as well, you're now doing a lot of this work, right? You guys evolved from sort of delivering and having your solutions, if you will, right, to helping others adopt those. So tell us about how you're doing that work, and you must have interest from a lot of different kinds of organizations, how you have to tailor the approach and what the different challenges and also opportunities are as you work with different kinds of organizations.
Well, I think one of the tactics of the strategies, the making it personal, is really important to us, because I think if you need a sort of entry point to talk about climate and sustainability and to make it real for people at whatever, you know, wherever they are. And we're all people who live lives and make an impact. And so from our point of view, that idea of everybody thinking about their own impact. And so with One Planet Living, we usually do it as a process. And when we start workshops, we usually say, oh, bring something along that speaks about sustainability to you. You know, what does sustainability mean to you? And somebody might bring their bicycle helmet or their reusable cup or a photo of their children or something like that. And then it just gets people thinking about it from the perspective of, I'm a person living a life and I'm trying to be sustainable, and gets you in the right space. So that's how we always start. But then for example, if we're thinking about how to then design our local areas or a new community, we would also make it personal, because we'd take the perspective of the person who's going to live there or work there and think about, because nobody gets up in the morning and thinks, oh, I'm going to go out and cause climate change and cut down trees. And it's just that that's the way we set up our lives. So taking that perspective and then thinking about it as you think about either this new community we're going to build, or where we live, or I've got a business and I make stuff for people. How do I provide my products or services that's going to help others to reduce, to achieve one planet living? And so first thinking about it for yourself, and then getting into the vibe of that, and then thinking about it as a perspective to then design for sustainability. And I think, and that can work with everyone as an individual, but also we worked on getting the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, which is maybe more comes later, but we're even working with diplomats at the UN. They have to work on different things all the time. They can't be experts on everything. So telling a simple story to, as it says here, build understanding, so that they can simply understand, oh, these are where the impacts are. Oh, look, it can be done. This is how our impact breaks down. Oh, I get it now. This is doable. And, coming up with the financial reasons why it's possible as well. That's always an important element. And I think also having all the decision makers in the room with their different perspectives feels like an important part of a climate change makers playbook. That, it's no good just talking to the sustainability people. You need to bring in everybody, because this is something that we've all got to work on together. And the finance director, will have a good perspective that will help to make a better solution that you can go forward with.
Thank
And
you.
I don't know if
that's really helpful. And I want to ask Pip to sort of bring in some other examples, right? We had so many, first of all, you interviewed so many fellows, and we had the case studies. We have lots of other examples peppered in the report. Just share a few that really showcase the kinds of leadership and collaborative skills that are needed.
This is probably simultaneously my favorite question and also the hardest. I think one of the most exciting parts of the research was getting to have incredibly inspiring conversations and to get sort of almost like a front row seat of what's being done all around the world. The example that I'd love to sort of dive into a bit is an organization called Canopy, who are based in Canada. It's one of the case studies in the playbook, but I think given that we're sitting in a business school, it feels the most relevant, because Canopy and the Ashoka Fellow who founded it, Nicole Rycroft, take the perspective that the customer is always right. And their objective is to protect ancient and endangered forests. And so when you think about the ancient and endangered forests, who's the biggest client? Who's the biggest customer? Well, it's the really big companies. And so their sort of focal point, some of the biggest companies in the world, they work with Fortune 500 companies that work across multiple different industries. So they work with publishers, packaging companies, and fashion companies. And they work with leaders within those businesses to help them transform their supply chains. Because at the end of the day, it's much easier to start at the position of that has the greatest leverage, which is those big companies, rather than working with the smaller, more dispersed companies that are actually closest to the forests. And so what they do is they work with sustainability managers, of course, but they also work with CEOs, with boards, and all of the tactics that are in the playbook, they do every single one of them. But so, for example, some of the things that they do is they can be walking alongside business leaders to do things like writing new policies, or helping put together the financial case so that they can make the case to their shareholders, or if it's the CEO, to their board. But they also bring together communities of leaders in sort of non-competitive spaces so that they can work together to figure out how to shift things that then ripple across the supply chain. Now, they've been doing this for a long while, over 20 years. And in the past few years, they're still doing that type of work. But one of the things that they've started doing is they recognized that one of the barriers was a lack of commercial scale alternatives. And so they set up an investment fund that invests in what they call next generation solutions. So commercial scale, fully circular alternatives to forestry products. And I think it's one of the most awesome examples because they literally tick off every single one of the tactics. And it's at a scale that I think is relevant to the business school.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things I love is it sits there in the playbook, right, alongside examples of people working in totally different contexts, like rural fishing villages, right, using the same kinds of approaches, right, with the people in those communities to galvanize action, right? And the sort of the power of, it can feel very, I would say, mundane almost, right? Like this is really in the day-to-day and the sort of interpersonal relationships and conversations, and yet that's what it takes, right? It's not minute, right? Those details really matter. But this is actually one of the challenges I think we had in writing the playbook, which is, the scale that we need, the speed that we need to address the climate problem is massive, right? And here we are talking about these sort of very sort of fine details of the interaction, the personalization, the providing support. And so how can you kind of square those? Like, how does the playbook help us think about really having action at the scale and speed that's needed, given the tactics we're talking about?
Yeah. So I think, like, if I come back to that idea that there are so many solutions out there, like what's stopping them to get out there is partially that this idea of the uptake process or the change management process has kind of been neglected. And Sue, to your point earlier of like the diplomats don't have time to get entirely up to speed on every single issue that they need to sit across. And so while some of these things that we're talking about, because we're talking about these tactics that are very human, there's a risk that it sounds super grassroots. But I think when we talk about climate change, there's a risk that the way that we talk obscures the actor. So what do I mean by that? We talk about the rapid uptake of tech solutions, but who's the actor in that sentence? Who's doing the uptake of the tech solutions? We talk about the need for policy change, but who's changing those policies? We talk about decision makers at every level needing to decide differently, but who are the decision makers? And I think when we looked into the work that the fellows were doing, they were working with people at each of those different levels and really grappling with, who are the named individuals? Like, what do they care about? What are the things that are going to make them motivated to change? What are the things that are going to let them like actually have the internal motivation to change? And so it really came down to a rapid increase of agency, climate agency, across all of those different actors, because the types of solutions that we need are so context specific. Like that's what's required to reach scale. And it's, simultaneously as simple and as complex as that.
Okay, great. I think there's another, I completely agree. And I think there's another piece, which we touch on in the playbook, which is in the enabling environment, right? there's two ways to take that. Some of what we mean by creating an enabling environment is literally at the level of individuals or groups or organizations thinking about what else, what are their competing demands? What other priorities do they face? And how can we address those so they can focus on the climate issues and take action there? But some of it is also thinking more macro about structures, incentive systems, financial systems, and how we can shift those to be more supportive and enabling of the kinds of actions we need rather than getting in the way of those. And so, Sue, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that because you work kind of at the local level and globally. And just reflect on what lessons you've seen from, or you've learned from doing that work that relate to this piece around the enabling environment, which is both kind of very micro, but also very macro.
So I've got a couple of examples. So where we're working with real estate developers, you know, and they've got their shareholders and their bottom line, and we're creating new build communities. There's the, you know, they can use One Planet Living, and some of them do, and they can create really sustainable, build very sustainable homes that make it easy for people to live a sustainable life, and some of them do. And in some ways, they need to be motivated to want to do that. But there's also this sort of idea, you know, this cliche almost of the level playing field, which is a bit of a joke for developers, I guess. But, you know, if somebody else can build not such good homes more cheaply and sell them more cheaply, you know, they're going to make more money. And so there's a need for policy change as well, which is the enabling environment. And so recently the government in the UK issued what they called the Future Homes Standard. So it's the next level of building standard. And it should be really good, shouldn't it? If it's called the Future Home Standard, it should be like, that's it, that's what we're aiming for. And when it came out, we were a bit underwhelmed. And I think there was a bit of the climate populism, culture war thing going on with the Prime Minister. Actually, you know, a networks that I'm in had to get on the phone to number 10 and say, don't scrap it, please issue it. So when they issued it, it was a bit underwhelming. It's kind of okay, it's a bit better, but it's not good enough. So we thought, well, we've got to do something, a few of us. And some people said, we're too close to the government or the system, and we need you, bioregional, to work on this. So we created a campaign. We had no money to do that, but we just worked on a campaign to work with everyone to distill the voices and the kind of the hive mind of experts into what would be an acceptable response to this consultation on this new building regulation, which is have a big impact in the UK. And that wasn't just listening to what do the experts say is what's needed. It was also listening to, you know, well, what are the issues for the house builders? They want consistency. What are the issues for the government? And how to sort of just judge it just right so that it lands well with the policymakers and all of the stakeholders. So that was a 3-month project to pull that together. And then just last week got an email from the Housing Ministry saying, right, well, come in and see Baroness. We got 250 organisations to sign up to it, including some developers. And the Baroness said, come in and meet the Minister and tell us about your idea. And I think one of the things that we've said is we'd like some slight improvements to the current standard. And then we'd like to all work together on a higher voluntary standard so that local authorities can adopt a higher standard, developers can work to it, and there's learning there. And then that can be the next generation of the building standard. And they like that idea. You know, we didn't ask for the moon, but we've asked for some urgency there. So we had to just judge it just right. But it was a lot of work and it wasn't funded, but we've done it. And I think we're going to get what we want. So that's one example of a kind of the enabling environment and system change. And I guess, I don't know, is there time to talk about the UN? Yeah. So with the UN, I think there's something about if there's a process going on, if you've got the time and if you've got a bit of resource somehow, get involved, because I've always found that where you can make the most difference in system change is where there's already something going on. And so the UN announced they were having the Sustainable Development Process, which was to follow up from the original Rio conference in 1992, so 20 years after Rio. And so I was actually motivated because we've been doing these projects showing it can be done. And I thought, oh, great, you know, we're all going to be sensible here and we're all coming up with solutions and we're all going to sort this out. And then heard directly from the IPCC scientists in 2008 that we were actually going to get climate change. And today, when even the taxi driver or, you know, anyone you meet in a shop will agree that we are experiencing climate change. Back then, it was a bit of a shock, and it was a real spur to me to up our game and go and work at the UN. I was quite distressed about it. Now people talk about climate anxiety. You may have suffered from it. At the time, everyone said, a few people said it's climate trauma. And a lot of us have got it because it's this massive loss. You know, how it's so huge. What are we doing to our world? How we're changing it. And I found that you can channel that emotion into energy and go and deploy it rather than sort of go home and get depressed or give up. So we went to all the UN meetings and got involved in the process. And with system change, there's something about letting go of your own organisation's ego, as it were, or your own ego as well, and being part of the team, like we were when we worked on the Future Home Standards. We just all worked on it together. The same thing happened at the UN, and one of the clever things that they did at the UN was, because the UN's all about the G77 and China disagreeing with the West, basically. That's kind of always set up to happen. And so the clever people who organised it, they split the governments into groups of 3, troikas, and 70 governments said, we'll work on it. And so different governments ended up working to get the Sustainable Development Goals, and we were just all part of a team down the years, and civil society was involved as well. And it was just such a wonderful collaborative process. And I know the UN Sustainable Development Goals are only voluntary, but they are the closest thing we've got to the better world we all want to see. And governments do have to report on what they've done about them, and we can all use them, you know, to say, we can point to them in our work and say, you committed to that. And so I don't know, for me, that was a big moment where I felt when we actually got the SDGs, and we campaigned, in particular, bi-regional campaigned for sustainable consumption and production. We went around trying to get all the diplomats interested in this idea, and we had sort of badges with a heart saying, I love SCP, sustainable consumption and production, and we made it a thing, and it became a goal. And, you know, I presented it to the co-chairs, and we got all of the civil society organisations to sort of input to this document about what language we wanted to use. So it was so much stronger to have the hive mind of everybody on what the language would be. And the co-chairs said, oh, we afterwards, you know, a couple of hours later, they came up to me and said, oh, we like it, we're going to use it. And we got goal 12, sustainable consumption and production. And that's really One Planet Living goal. It's the goal for the richer nations to deal with. So that felt to me like a big moment of system change, where we were able to leverage these local examples. I took the people who'd worked on these eco-villages, or the people who'd worked on sustainable products that we work with, to the UN to present to the diplomats, you know, and made it real and personal to them. But at the same time, it was then creating this enabling framework, which admittedly we've got so much more to do, but I still think it's good and it's an achievement.
Yeah, no, it's a great example. And there's a lot in there, right? There's the, I mean, you said we made it a thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
it became, you didn't say we made it cool, but there was some element of like, people thought they needed to be on board with it, right?
Yeah.
And there's that cultural piece that I think we often don't value enough in this space. That's really important. And of course, then there's the sort of bringing the example, showing it's possible, right? And then bringing a lot of people together around that.
It works, guys.
Not easy though. Long process.
It's actually really fun. Oh, you should enjoy your work. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so there's a lot more in the playbook. We've not touched on all the themes. I just want to give each of you the opportunity to share a final message from the playbook or from your work on climate change making more broadly. And then we'll go to questions.
I think the thing I'd want to finish with is just that, you know, because climate change touches everything, you know, we need roles for people everywhere. You know, we need climate jobs, we need political parties to be standing on climate policies regardless of their leanings. We need people to be thinking differently, acting differently. And that sounds like a massive challenge, but I'm just seeing so many people who are wanting to move into this space. Right? When I started my career, I tried to get into climate change, but there were no climate jobs. And so I spent many years doing other things. And now it's kind of like, it's a thing. And I think that that is super exciting. And so that's my final message. Thank you.
And I'd say you're all here because I guess you're climate change makers. Sorry, no, that sounds wrong. you want to do something to change things, to tackle climate change. And I think the playbook can be a useful resource for you to look down and see what it chimes for you. And it's really important to do what inspires you and follow that, you know, be that person walking in the woods without the torch a little bit. You don't know straight away what it's going to be that you can do. Maybe you're well on the way with the journey, but if you don't know yet what it is, just follow what really inspires you as interesting for you. And one of the things in the playbook here is, you know, people help you. It's in here somewhere, I know, but basically, you know, ask people, work with others, and people will help you and point you in the right direction and give you support and advice. So as Pip says, you know, we need everyone everywhere working on this. And it is, you know, these are the jobs of now, not even the future. Right? This is important work now. We can't get enough staff, you know, if you want to join.
Okay, let's open it up to questions from the room and also from those of you joining online.
My question is about first mover disadvantage.
Oh yeah.
So what do you see in the field with your entrepreneurs that you engage with, companies and organizations you work with? How do they deal with first mover disadvantage? And we have these many initiatives, standard setting, etc., that aim at leveling the playing field. And what are your reflections of that?
I'm just going to repeat the question so people joining online can hear. So it's about first mover disadvantage and the sort of many standards that are out there that could level the playing field, but someone's got to go first. And there's always there can be seen to be a risk or concern around that.
I think if you're starting a new product or service, it's almost easier to create something really sustainable from the start, where you can have a first mover advantage. When you've got an existing, or setup, whatever it is, it's actually, you've got to change things and change management, and that's harder. I think you have to be careful. People need to earn a living, and you do have to be careful not to sort of rock the boat so much that it tips over for your company or your organization. But I think it's just about being smart and finding a way. It's almost like knowing that this is where we want to get to, and here are the quick wins. Finance directors, I'm always talking about them, aren't they? They love quick wins that they can report and talk about, and so do the communications people. So I think it depends what sort of thing you're talking about. If it's a startup, I think you can actually design it so that you can, cruise in and really take an advantage. But yeah, quick wins, but having a plan, or my colleagues call it glide path to zero carbon, and the new products and services that are needed. But does that answer your question at all?
I wanted to add something. So I was having a conversation with a dear friend of mine yesterday who is in an organization that essentially has that first mover disadvantage, right? And they have been doing it really hard for a very long while, and there's a chance that the company won't succeed, right? Like, it's a very real chance at the moment. And we were talking about it, and one of the things that that we were reflecting on is, even if the company doesn't succeed, what they have made possible and what they have shown as being possible is going to have ripples well beyond any product that they could have produced. And so, like, while that's really hard in the moment and for that company and for my friend, I think, like, at a systems level, there's other things that are then unlocked.
Yeah, I've still got some things that I want to do that were just too way ahead of their time, and I'm still hoping they'll come good one of these days, but at least they added to the knowledge, as Pip says.
Yeah.
My question is slightly related to the first one, and it's about the fact that nothing succeeds like success. And it was mentioned that it's good to jump onto something that's already got going. And my impression of the political discussion and the media discussion of climate change and environmental issues is that nobody has the big picture in mind. Everybody is focusing on the present disaster on the sub goal that is just not being met, yeah, the backtracking that is just happening, and we kind of get discouraged, I think, by these news items, because I don't know, many of us have a source to go to that gives us, you know, like in factfulness, you know, the big picture, and how we're doing at achieving the big goals. Because I hear that actually in 2024-25 will be the first year when we are no longer increasing carbon emissions. Well, that's, you know, something that people ought to know, and that ought to be a motivating fact. So is there something in addition to as part of the playbook, a dashboard, to talk in management speak, that tells us where we are, where we're behind, and where we're okay? Other than The Economist, which had a cover doing something like that about 4 weeks.
There is, I'm just trying to think what it's called, the climate tracker that comes out at the COP, the climate conferences, that says how each country's doing. And for the UK, the Committee on Climate Change always they create the carbon budget for the UK, and they always issue we're on track here, we're not on track here. But yeah, we do need politicians and leaders to have vision and show leadership, because you just really see what a difference it makes if our leaders could show leadership, whether that's in business or in politics or in civic service.
So one of the tactics that we observed across the interviews was around making progress visible, which I think is kind of what you're talking about. The thing is that I think is really interesting and also makes this like quite a knotty challenge is that what feels like motivating progress to me is probably different to you. And so it's then like, you know, I mean, amazing. We're going to peak emissions in 2025. That's awesome. But that's also massive and just as abstract and technical for a lot of people that makes it kind of, it makes a part of, well, for me, sometimes I confess, makes a part of my brain switch off. It's kind of like, okay, but like, how is my action linking up to that? And so I think like the thing that I've been pondering lately is around the meta narratives, like the collective storytelling that we do as a society that helps us understand what's happening in the world and therefore how we should be acting. And I think that there's, the doom and gloom type messaging that you're talking about that sort of seems to dominate the media is very effective at stirring up an emotive reaction, but it isn't necessarily helpful. And so then my question is then like, so what are the narratives that are helpful? How do we build agency? How do we build motivation through the stories that we're telling? And if you have an answer, then let me know.
Yeah, the trouble with the media is they only want to hear the bad news.
Yeah.
Well, someone from the media is going to speak up on that one. I would just say, I think there's sort of three things going on here that are challenges. There's always three. One is sort of the complexity, right, that Anna, you're talking about, like there's so many things going on. How do we see the big picture? The other is like the mix of the positive, negative, right? Where are we making progress? And the third is the levels, which Pip, you talked about, right? Like, okay, great if we have this sort of macro sense of progress, but what does that mean for me? Or what am I going to do differently? Sort of where's the chain connecting to my world and my action? And all three need to be addressed in some way. Yes, question in the back.
Right. For 30 years, the climate movement has been moving forward on the offensive, if you like, really pushing the idea that basically, for God's sake, do something. Now things are being done, and there's an awful lot of people who don't actually like it very much. There's an awful lot of pushback. The climate denial industry is telling us that electric cars catch fire every day, that eating meat is good for the planet, you know, heat pumps don't work. And I think a lot of the climate action movement really isn't geared up to be on the defensive, to deal with that pushback. And I think it's a new thing. Are there defensive plays in your playbook that would help us maintain what we've got?
I love the idea of defensive plays. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it is a playbook. Yeah, I just want to like echo the fact that that so resonates with what I've been seeing. Yeah, it's like, yes, tick, we've managed to get people to care about climate change. Awesome, job done. Oh, no, wait, hang on. We've now got to get them to agree about the solutions. Oh, how do we do that? And that's being weaponized, right? That division is being weaponized by the vested interests. I mean, and we see it here in Oxford, right? Like it's such a live conversation at the moment with the you know, the livable streets, 15-minute cities, and the conspiracy theories that came from that. And I do think that these last two questions are like, they're kind of linked, right? Because it's again, it's about the collective stories that we tell and what that then creates permission for, what that makes possible. And I like, and this is something that I think there are a lot of awesome people in the UK working on, is how do you create a sense of the possible? How do you, you know, we've been fighting against things. We've been in opposition to things for so long. How do you move into the propositional? How do you move into the space of working for something? And that's a very different mindset, a very different set of tactics. And I think, Sue, you've been in the propositional space for so long. You've been showing what's possible, and it's like, then how do we make that like infectious? How do we make that contagious?
I think it's. I went to. Sorry, I didn't go to Saïd, but I went to Cranfield Management School to do a course, and they said that the big thing now in marketing is trust. And so, you know, people trust other people. They trust their friends, and somehow that's how the messaging comes as well. So when people get that reactionary populist type stuff, that's coming from networks that they're in. So I think one of the solutions could be, you know, my son's got a heat pump, invite his friends around and talk about it. And different people have different, and I'm not sure it's in the playbook exactly, although I was seeing, oh yeah, that fits with that and that. But I think we've all got a job to do to tell everyone we know that these things are good and why they're good. And the government's, you know, there's a role for everyone, but that's something we can all do, definitely. But I'm not sure if that really is going to tackle what you're saying, Chris, because it feels there's a very powerful backlash narrative going on.
I mean, I think in part this reflects the timing of when we gathered the data and what's like, things are changing really quickly. And we didn't see people with the defensive plays, right? Because I think they weren't as needed even just a few years ago, right? And so things have really changed. And I think there's a role both for sort of showing the possible and having the ability to push back, to defend, to counter. That probably is both are becoming more important. Okay, we have time for one or two last questions. Annette.
Thank you very much. Some of the best writers are being praised for being able to spin gold out of the mundane fabric of life. You spun gold and inspiration out of the mundane fabric of life too, so I congratulate you on that. And also to the Changemaker Playbook, I think it's also what comes to mind. He said everyone wants to change the world, but no one wants to change themselves. So I think it's really nice that you're starting somewhere there, making it personal and seeing what we can. But at the same time, we are responsibilizing ourselves, the individuals. We also need to think about some of the systemic pressures that are creating headwinds for us here. And the one word that we haven't really stumbled on yet, but I think it's important, is inequality and rising inequality and who is paying the cost of climate action. And I think inequality plays into this hugely because it's part of the backlash story. It's not just about vested interests. It's also about people who are feeling they are falling behind economically, and now they are being asked to carry this burden as well. But the politics should be going the other way. We need to responsibilize more the 1% and corporations who are creating the problems for the consumers. So is there anything we can do about allocating or distributing the costs in a more equitable way and still making citizens part of this?
So I'm just going to quickly sort of summarize the gist of the question is about sort of inequality, and that we can't ignore that piece of the problem and so the intersections of inequality and climate. And so, and what can we do about that piece?
I mean, if you're thinking about,
No small question.
if you're thinking about the UK, I mean, I think it's one for the politicians in terms of equalize, adjusting the system, because, there's a certain amount of money and just redistributing it more fairly. Because we are seeing a growth in the super rich, and there are ideas like taxing capital and not just income. So there are ideas around that. And I think one of the big things in the UK, there's a lot going on with reducing, improving the insulation in everyone's houses. That's the big job now that needs to be done. Reducing the reliance on the car. So, because often if you haven't got much money, it's the cheapest thing to do is run a car. The train will cost you more money, or fly, so it's just the way we've got the system set up. So I think hopefully we'll have a new government soon in the UK, and hopefully they'll look at it that way. But Pip, what do you think?
I mean, I think this is kind of the crux of it, right? Like if the solutions put the majority of the burden on the people who have the least ability to carry that burden, then they're not going to succeed. So one of the things that I'm hearing a lot in the conversations I'm having is like, actually a just transition is just a really pragmatic response. It's like, yes, it is also something that we should be striving to do as humans who care about other humans, but it is also just really pragmatic from a self-interested perspective. And maybe one other thing that gives me a little bit of hope is seeing that some of the really big institutions, like essentially the financial risk takers, or the financial risk holders, so the insurance companies, the investment companies, etc., are starting to see the climate risks show up as being theirs to solve. Again, from a really pragmatic perspective. And so I have a sense of hope that some of those top-down levers are going to start to be pulled with some urgency.
Oh, and can I build on that?
Yeah.
There's a book called The Spirit Level by Wilkinson and Pickett, which actually is evidence-based on why unequal societies are worse even for the rich people. So yeah, quote that back to the politicians and whoever's listening, I think.
Okay, thank you. So we're at 4:30, so I'm going to call this part of the discussion to a close, and thank you both for your comments, for engaging, for your work on the playbook. And thank you all for joining us here today in person and also online. I also want to thank all the Ashoka Fellows who participated in the research and shared their expertise and experiences. I encourage you to download the playbook, to use it, to share it with others. It's really written for all of you, for the entire community of changemakers. Please stay, if you're here in the room, join us for a reception afterwards in this space. And also I invite all of you to join us for the next Insights for Action seminar, which is Friday, 17th of May. We're going to be talking with some colleagues here at the business school, some folks from Acumen and from UNDP about impact finance. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.